Well, good evening, folks in Manchester, Hooks at Auburn. It's the Progress Report. And since this is the first Wednesday of October, my good friend Lou D'Alessandro is sitting next to me as my co-host, as is the case on every Wednesday. Mike Farley will be back next week. And tonight we are really pleased to welcome a guest I think is going to be of great interest to our viewers, and that's our police chief, Nick Willard. And, he's an outspoken guy. He's a guy who's all right, doesn't mince words. And, he's certainly heading our police force in a time of great interest in police issues. And we're going to talk a lot about those issues. And, Chief, I want to thank you for giving us an hour of your time. And I wonder if you would be willing to start off by giving us a little bit of your background and, how you came to be the chief here in Manchester.
Yeah, my name is Nick Willard. For those who don't know me, I'm the police chief here in Manchester. I've been with the police department 25 years. I've been in law enforcement 3 years before that, so 28 total. And I'm a military veteran. I was a United States Air Force security policeman stationed out in Colorado. And I came to Manchester basically because I loved the city, and at the time it was a great retirement system. I'm originally from Peaks Island, Maine. I wanted to be a Portland police officer, but they had just changed their retirement system, and then I started looking at surrounding states, and New Hampshire was just beautiful with a great retirement system. So for my future, this is the place I decided to settle on, and I'm delighted that I did.
Well, we're certainly glad you're here. And the old Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times.
Yes,
I do.
You
live in interesting times, especially given the job you have here as our chief of police. And there's a lot of things we want to talk about, but I think we cannot do anything but start with the incredible opioid epidemic, because your officers and your force right on the first line of defense. And it's astonishing to me with all the programs that we talked about this. Nobody's really told me yet that they see the wave receding. It just, the consequence is so dire. I mean, that's just astonishing. So, how are we doing, and what do you think is going to happen?
I have, the presidential primary really had put New Hampshire and Manchester on the map in a very negative way, and it had to do with the opiate crisis. But from that, I have been put on a national task force. The National League of Cities and Counties. It's a 26-member task force, and we are. Our goal is to come up with best practices to deal with this issue, and then present it to the White House. And the fact that I'm the only person in law enforcement that's on this task force tells you that Manchester is seen as a place that is on the front lines of this, but also that we are on the cutting edge. And the reason I know that is because in these discussions in these task force, I'm finding that every single community that is represented, and there are 26 places from across the country, they all feel like they're ground zero. Everybody thinks that we have it the absolute worst in New Hampshire and the absolute worst in Manchester. And when you're commiserating with some of your colleagues from across the country, some of them are mayors, some of them are executive counselors from counties, some of them are governors, and when they feel exactly how we feel, there is a level of comfort to that, because I really thought that, what is wrong here? And I understand the impetus of it, that, it's the pain medication and the overprescription of pain medication in New Hampshire, Maine, and Vermont per capita more than any other place in the country. But, it gave me a bit of resolve. But being in these discussions, they're taking a lot of the ideas that the city of Manchester has been employing, and the state of New Hampshire. So, I think we are making strides. I do believe there will be an end to this, but it's something else is down the road. We did not see this coming with the pain medication. So not only as we're dealing with this, we need to look for those indicators of what is going to happen next. What's behind this? Because I do think we'll pull through this.
Yeah, we got to get into the root cause of it. And do you think we've done that? Do you think we know the root cause of the problem?
I do. I think we do know the root cause of the problem. And initially, the medical community did not want to take ownership. But when Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont are in the top 5 for drug addiction, and we're in the top 3 states for the prescription of pain medication per capita. There's a correlation there, and it's real. The medical community, Mayor Gatsis pulled the 3 hospitals together to talk about this very issue, the CEOs of the 3 medical facilities, and they agreed it's time to change our pain regimens and our pain prescription policies, because they recognize there is an issue. Do you know that when you're in medical school, there is zero training on addiction, and probably like a 4-hour class on pain management and education?
Sounds pretty skinny.
It does, and this is coming directly from a
scary.
doctor who has talked to me about these issues.
I think an issue that, again, we're looking for a root cause. The fact that we're an aging population plays a role, because we are prolonging life, and we're prolonging life by prescription drugs, to be honest with you. People need certain medications. Add to that the fact that the society will not accept pain. They will not accept pain. Tolerance for pain is diminished. It's very, very low. So you get a situation where you have an enormous amount of elderly, a tremendous number of drugs being prescribed, and a social situation where says that I really don't want to be in pain, and I want something to alleviate that, and I want it immediately. And I think another thing that's entered into the picture is telephone prescriptioning. You don't see the doctor anymore. You call, you describe the symptoms over the phone, and they give you some script. If you're obviously, if you're in pain, you want something. But indeed, I think that practice magnifies itself, and we're dealing with that at the state level by putting in software at the Board of Pharmacy that now can tell you who's prescribing what and how much of that is being prescribed. And drug shopping happens to be another very serious situation. The prescription shopping, you're going from place to place to place. But Chief, I was amazed to find this statistic, and this really, really bothered me. The number of methadone clinics in New Hampshire. We have 8 methadone clinics in New Hampshire. In the city of Manchester, we have 2 methadone clinics. From what I can gather from my research, there's about 3,000 people who use those methadone clinics. They go every day to get their methadone. Under our Medicaid program, we pay for that. The state pays for that. People are on that methadone for an extended period of time. So in essence, we're creating our own addicts, and we're maintaining our own addicts. Now, supposedly you're going to get off drugs by this methadone situation. I just don't see that happening. And you're supposed to meet with a doctor. You're supposed to get counseling, and your case is supposed to be reviewed. These are for-profit centers. They are licensed by Health and Human Services. But I do think that that's something that we really have to look at. And there's one very close to the police station.
It's right outside my window.
Right outside your window. And there's another one very close to the health department here in Manchester. And I'm told now by your guys that at 5 o'clock in the morning they're lining up. They're lining up to get their treatment. So with that particular situation in place, do we have a duplicitous attitude towards prevention? Because we're prolonging it with the methadone maintenance, and yet on the other side we're saying, boy, that's bad, and if you commit a crime, you're in big trouble. So I think we've got to address these things. We've got to address them, on a total basis. If we carve out little segments, which is what we've done in the past, yeah, we see success, but on the other side we see growth. So that presents a tremendous problem for your guys who are out on the street.
I went to as part of this national task force that I'm on, the last meeting that we had was in Kentucky, just on the other side of Cincinnati, and we toured a methadone clinic, a for-profit methadone clinic. And from 5 a.m. to 7 a.m., you have to have employment in order to get your methadone for that day. When we were there to see, we had business people, we had construction workers, we had pretty much every walk of life coming through there. And then to see a completely different clientele, to see later in the afternoon, to see single parents, mothers with their children, standalone fathers, and sometimes even families. It's heart-wrenching, and I kind of share the same view with you. So I started to say, so this is all we're doing is we're just turning people over. Right. And then they went through the process, how, like you said, 90 days you have an evaluation. Right. You can only have so much. You're ultimately weaned off of it. Yeah. So I said, well, you're for profit. So what's your motivation to wean people off it? And he said, because there's so many people trying to get in, and we can only help so many. Right. But then the one interesting he said to me that did give me pause is it says if you have to take a medication for schizophrenia, and it changes that person to behave
Right.
with the symptom, why aren't you questioning that like you're questioning methadone, Chief?
Well,
And I get that,
Yep.
but you're right. I believe in abstinence recovery and treatment, but it's something I'm still trying to wrap my head around.
well, I think it's a very, very difficult thing to really to understand. Yet we've accepted that practice, as you say, around the country. Methadone and methadone maintenance has been accepted around the country. We got to come up with better solutions. Again, in my opinion, I'm not a physician. I did work in a mental health center one time, so I looked at the two methods where you treat these problems. One is the counseling method, the other is the medication method. And heck, it's hard to find counselors today. It's
But you
very,
touch
very
on
difficult.
mental health,
Yeah.
and there is a whole underlying demographic
No question.
of those people who self-medicate.
Yep, absolutely.
And typically that was the typical heroin user. But, we have changed the money that we put into mental health.
Yeah, we're
Law
working
enforcement's
on it.
now dealing with them. Our law enforcement officers, I am specifically training them on critical incident training.
Right.
So they are able to actually interact better with somebody who's suffering a mental episode. So in lieu of arrest, we actually get them help and mental health treatment. But we're seeing more and more of them on the street than we have ever seen before.
Boy, no question. And I think, when you think of us growing up, all right, and Bob and I are about the same age. We're on the older set. As my urologist said, I'm on the downside of the curve. I think of what it was like for a police officer in those days. And I think of the great Billy Luther in Manchester. Billy always comes to mind. He helped women cross the street. He tipped his hat to the ladies. He was walking down the hills, talking to people and so forth. Today, your guy has to deal with the drug addict, the mental health individual, domestic violence, and it's 24/7. They never get away from it. So it is a new world, and new training is required.
And they have to deal with instant social media, with cameras and things that in one moment you could be helping an elderly woman. We had this very situation. An officer helped an elderly woman across the street. Within an hour, the video or the picture of it went viral on social media. I heard about it in my office, how wonderful that is. But the alternative is true. If you have an officer who's misbehaving and is not doing his job at a traffic detail, it's out on social media and I'm getting a phone call. Hey, Chief, did you see this? I learned about our police cruiser that was inside a sinkhole because somebody sent me a picture from social media before they even had a chance to have the officer in charge give me a call and say, "Oh, Chief, I got some bad news. We have a cruiser in a sinkhole."
Well, I think social media has revolutionized the world.
It has changed the world.
Any question, there's no question about that. When I think of it in terms of our lives, political lives, think of us without social media and now with social media. But I
Told to
think,
get on that.
right, but as it relates to a police situation, it's also the 24/7 news coverage where that particular incident gets replayed over and over and over and over again, and it magnifies itself. It grows, it grows, it grows. And we're in a 24/7 news cycle. And we got all of these cable channels. Hell, we got 200 channels. They're all looking for news. They're all repeating the same thing over and over again. And we're faced with. I mean, we're faced with that in politics, and certainly on the law enforcement side, we're faced with that. I think it's tougher today to be a police officer than it's ever been, ever been.
Well, we're still pursuing a policy of community policing, aren't we? I mean,
Oh,
it's
yes.
still a big part of the program that Chief Mayor and I'm sure you're continuing it. So
Well, community policing was around back in the early 90s, actually. So I was one of the original community police officers. So no one instituted it. It's been carried on from Chief Favreau to Chief Driscoll to Chief Jaskoka to Chief Mara, now to me, and we are not going to change it. Absolutely not. If anything, we're making it more robust.
well, that's good. We do have this whole horrible opiate epidemic, and certainly a big part of what you have to do is deal with the crime that derives from that. And there's some really horrifying stories. I keep thinking about the one about the young woman that robbed a bank here in Manchester, and before you could catch her, she was dead from a drug overdose. And so many stories like that. But you've said, and many others have said, this is not a problem we can arrest our way out of. So what are the? And you've also talked about, you have to provide mental health training. I remember when we were chatting just before we came on here, Chief, about the chief in Dallas after that horrible loss of 5 officers in that city, and saying, as a society, we've turned so many of our problems over to the cop. Mental health has been turned over to the cop. Lots of issues in domestic life have been turned over to the cop. And I'm sure you see that in Manchester, too. How's your force deal with it?
Well, you're absolutely right. We're seen to pretty much have to take care of everything. We have to take care of kids' education about drug issues as opposed to the school district. We have to take care of those who are suffering the disease of addiction by getting them alternatives to incarceration, which I agree with. A lot of people wanted me to take the Gloucester model, in which a police officer, if you're addicted, you can come into the police station, give them your drugs, and the police officer will walk you down the road to recovery, get you an angel. And they wanted law enforcement to do that, and I didn't agree with the Gloucester method. I think safe station method is far more appropriate because they're the medical professionals, the firemen, they're EMTs, every one of them. They're better suited and prepared to deal with somebody who's suffering a disease of addiction like that as opposed to law enforcement. Because you come in, give your drugs to an officer in Gloucester, they bring you down the road to recovery, that Gloucester police officer gets in his cruiser, he stops a person for drunk driving, and arrests them. Now, last I knew, alcoholism was also a disease, but they're going to be charged with that one. And then if they have drugs on them, they get charged an additional charge for a felony drug charge. So the inequitable application of law. But what it says is law enforcement, we're seeing so much as being social agents that some law enforcement agencies are actually adopting that Gloucester model. And so I agree with the chief from Dallas. Some of us are going in the absolute wrong direction. We need to have better solutions like Safe Station and keep everybody in their proper lanes. I believe very much so that somebody who is nonviolent and has an addiction and their underlying crime is driven by that addiction, breaking into cars, I would prefer to see them in treatment than I would incarcerated.
Recently, there's been a new grant through this Granite Hammer.
Yes.
What will that mean, and how will that be utilized?
I just want to clarify some things because I talked to some state representatives who were under the impression that Manchester's Granite Hammer initiative last year was state money, and I did everything with my police budget. I had 21 vacancies at Manchester PD, so I took that budgeted money and I brought in state police, DEA, and Manchester police. And what we did is we went after those low-lying drug dealers, the ones that are affecting the lives of everyday citizens on Manchester Street, on 2nd Street, on Ferry Street, and we went after them within a 2-week period. So once we had a 2-week investigation done, we brought in up to 26 to 30 plainclothes detectives who scoured the city and pinched or arrested all of these individuals. And then while we're doing that, we're getting people to flip and we're going out and getting another person. So we arrested 139 people, I believe, in 8 operations. And it made an immediate impact in our crime. And then we also used the money to partner with state police and Manchester police in uniform. So on certain nights, we looked at our predictive analytics to find out when crime is the highest. So we had 5 police cars out there, so 10 additional officers, a Manchester officer and a state trooper, in marked units, and they hit areas that our analytics tell us there's going to be a problem. I don't even remember the numbers of arrests, summonses, towed vehicles, checks, but during those times that we had those extra cars out there, crime during those periods was down 46%. And it was an amazing result. So we're going to be doing that on steroids with the new money that we have, because I was playing with my budgeted money, and it really wasn't a lot. The money that we got from the state, and you know, the great senator was key behind it and an advocate for it. We are going to make a significant dent in what we can accomplish with this money.
That sounds really good, really good. Let's switch gears just a little bit, Chief.
Want to talk about my beard?
Yeah, let's talk about your beard.
Yeah.
I thought you were just decided not to shave. And
you know, when I first became chief, I was at a honor flight, And I think I was assistant chief when they first started talking about it. But I was at an honor flight at Manchester Airport with a midnight shift, and we're seeing the veterans off to go to D.C., and it was just a wonderful occasion. So the officers know I don't take myself seriously. I take the job very seriously. So I'm an approachable chief, and they're like, Chief, what do you think about growing beards? Absolutely not. I'm a traditionalist. I'm a hat guy. You know, I came up the right way, you know, under Sammy Osceola and those guys.
You're with the New York Yankees.
You know? So I said, listen, it'd have to be a pretty amazing charity.
Right.
And given, you know, what people don't know, if they really strip down what I'm doing as chief, you know, put aside my bombast and put aside the opioid and all that stuff, I am doing things to better the lives of children in this city like the Manchester Police Department has never done. And I'm very, very proud of it. But that's good, you know. So anyways, knowing that, somebody came to me and said, what about the CAC chief? And that's the Child Advocacy Center. And what they do is they do forensic interviews of children who are sexually or physically abused. In the old days when I was a young copper, we would do the interviews. So I would be interviewing a 4-year-old, 5-year-old girl who had been sexually abused. You know, I'm a policeman. I don't have necessarily the skill set. You'd still extrapolate the information, but it was difficult for the child. It was difficult in court. We were really challenged by the very good, skilled defense attorneys. So now we actually have a forensic examiner that does it, and they do it for a living. And the police officers in the background, we communicate back and forth the things that we need to know, and it's actually stripping the trauma away from the child of the investigation. If you go to the facility by Elliott Hospital, every child that they interview, they put both of their hands in paint and they put them on the walls. They painted those walls over in that building 3 times now. Just to tell you the sheer number of children. So once they said that, I said, I'm in. So we did this where we do the Beards for Bucks. I don't know if you can see it. And what we do is any officer that participates, they pay $50. We have 129 officers participating. And then they give these cards out when people talk to them about their beards.
Keep it held up and I'll zoom in on it.
Okay. And then they tell the officers, you know, they ask the officers about it. The officer gives them the card with their name on it. And then they go online. They then donate under the officer's name. And then we have a competition. So every single officer of the Manchester Police Department who's participating.
I was going to say, that's your full compliment.
It tells you, we know how much. So last year we raised almost $26,000 in 30 days.
Wow.
Already, 1 week, we're at about $12,000 already. What I'm most proud of is so many other departments in the state of New Hampshire have adopted this, 15 communities in Maine, and I am on a mission to make it a national law enforcement month to grow beards for CACs across the country, and it's going to be much like the torch run is for Special Olympics. And,
so once again, how do citizens participate in this if they want to support this?
all you have to do is go on the website. I believe it's on the back of the card. Can you zoom in on that? I should have clipped my nails. So if you go to
Child
that
Advocacy Center.
if you go to that website, I think it's down in the lower bottom, and donate under me. So go to the drop-down menu and donate under Chief Willard. I won last year. I raised the most money, and now
I'd like to win again.
well, everybody and their
Repeat
brother is
performance.
trying to beat me this year. So
Well, great
Right.
idea.
That's a really
it's
neat
awesome.
idea. That's
Very
really
worthy,
good.
very
if
worthy.
I leave the Manchester Police Department with one thing that I'm really proud of, if the nation adopts this, I would be just incredibly proud of that.
Okay, very good.
Well, it's reminiscent of the Ice Bucket Challenge.
Yes,
really.
exactly.
You know, and I must say this, Chief. I think it's a great idea, and it's an extremely worthy cause. If it is as successful on a nationwide basis as the Ice Bucket Challenge, you've really made history.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And for the best cause. You know, for the best cause. I mean, what is better than taking care of someone who needs your help?
And it pertains so importantly to what we do in law enforcement. I mean, we're protecting these children. There's less trauma that's caused upon them by the investigation, and we're putting bad guys away. And I mean, it's the perfect charity.
That's a great twosome.
So I think a lot of people, Chief, have the feeling that crime is rampant in Manchester.
Yep.
You know, it's partly because of social media, as Lou
Yes,
was suggesting.
absolutely.
That, you know, everything gets repeated, and of course, TV news. It's always crime always leads.
Yeah.
If it bleeds, it leads. That's the saying. And but is Manchester a safe city, and is it getting safer?
Manchester's a very safe city, and it is getting safer. Crime this time from last year is down 22%. Nobody wants to report it. They want to say, yeah, but violent crime is up. Mid-year violent crime was up 14%. We had a rash of shooting with some gang members out of Boston. We put that down in a hurry. We circled our wagons. We put a lot of resources into these individuals once we identified them. We were around-the-clock surveillance. We were not going to tolerate another shooting after one on West Street, and we arrested all of them. And there's going to be more charges coming. Since that arrest, violent crime is now up 9% as opposed to the 14%, and it's steadily going down. But people get caught up. You know what upsets me is I have my own social media. I have my own Facebook with my family and my friends, and I kind of keep to that. I don't travel outside of it often, but people will send me things, and I see people calling Manchester a cesspool, and it's just a terrible, terrible thing. Yeah. But you know what? We've talked so much about the heroin crisis. I testified down in Washington, D.C. about it, and we're being recognized nationally. The Paris Police Department, Police Academy in France, contacted me and wanted to know if we could send a detective to their police academy to talk about the heroin epidemic.
No kidding.
I sent two of our detectives.
Wow. They
were there for a week. They put together a lesson plan.
I hadn't heard that reported anywhere.
It's true. So we are being known for it. But you know what they found was when they asked the detectives, the Manchester detectives, what do you think the root cause is? And they talked about pain medication. The guy said, the constable or whatever they call the police officer in France, he said that, well, we don't have that problem because you can't get a prescription unless you're in the hospital. When you leave, you walk out with ibuprofen. And there's a big difference in prescribing practices. So they don't have an addiction issue in Paris like we do.
Wow, that is interesting. I'm really glad you told us that.
But I'm telling you, crime is down 22%.
Okay.
Violent crime is up 9%. Absolutely no doubt about it.
And that's dropping.
Yeah, it's dropping now, but still, it's so unacceptable because every one of those is another person.
Yes.
Right.
And the way we track our crime trends, that 9% increase, 42% of that in of itself is domestic violence. We don't understand that. We have a robust domestic violence unit. I don't think we're encouraging more people to report. Perhaps that's the case, but that's an interesting trend that we're trying to wrap our heads around.
Chief, when you look at the demographic of the city, now, I look at the demographic, and granted, I only look at the areas I represent, 3, 4, 10, and 11, and I look at it based on single-parent head of household, female head of household, and try to look at the number of what I would call stable families. It's remarkable how many single-parent households we have in this city, and how many female head of households we have in this city. And I think those social items are part of this domestic violence situation. And I live in a very blue-collar part of the city of Manchester, on the west side of Manchester. And I have had a couple of calls at my house where we had to call your people about a domestic violence situation. Mm-hmm. I've lived in my house for almost 50 years. And great neighborhood. Never thought anything like that would happen. To be honest with you, we never locked our doors in the early days. But I think domestic violence, and think of the amount of legislation, Bob, we have that deals now with domestic violence. That seems to be a real social problem, and it's okay. I mean, for some reason, maybe it's the television, and there's a lot of violence on television where people are hitting one another and so forth. But that crime, it really bothers me because children are there, children see it. Sometimes children become involved. Those cases are unbelievable, and the officer, when he comes in, can't win because both of the parties are against the officer.
Yes, sir.
And it's trying to do a good job, but indeed both of them turn on him. Difficult situation. I don't know how you prepare for that.
Let me touch on that. I grew up pretty hard scrabbled life. I think my story is known a little bit around the city, and we were very poor. I was from a broken family. There was alcoholism. There was abuse. So it was difficult. I didn't particularly care for police officers because they would come in my home, tell my dad to take a walk, tell my mother to stop making him angry. The other police officer would line all 8 of us kids up on the couch. I felt, I'm a sensitive kid and I'm a fighter, I guess. I felt that they had contempt for us and they didn't help us, so I didn't particularly care for them. When I became chief, it was important for me, because I've never forgotten where I come from and who I am. And when I became chief, I put on a child advocate in October. So that means any child that experienced trauma gets advocacy. There were more systems and help and support for a domestic violence abuser than there was for the child that witnessed the abuse. So I changed that. And then recently we moved it into something in which I now have a response team that when a child is in a home, a police officer goes to the home you're talking about.
Right.
Once they get it settled down, if they identify there's children in the home, they get a release, then our ACERT team responds. That's a police officer, a social worker, and an advocate. And they immediately go to the child. They get the child either a different location, they get the child services in real time. And it's something that is really starting to take off. I'm starting to get calls from all over the country. We met with Senator Shaheen recently because she didn't know if once we develop the outcomes to show that it's evidence-based, to maybe implement this and then get some sort of federal funding. But right now, we're the only police department in the entire United States of America that is doing this ACERT program, and I'm very proud of it. And it's because of domestic violence. But let's say they witness a drug overdose in their home, or let's say we have a SWAT raid. Not knowing that there are children inside. Sure. We activate this team and they respond in real time to help these children. And it's something that I think is vitally important, particularly with the heroin overdose and what these kids are experiencing.
No question. There's just no question about it. And I related this story to Bob about a situation where I happened to be in South Station in Boston, and I witnessed an individual overdosing, a young man, and locked himself in the bathroom and had to get the police in and so forth. But the kids who were in that bathroom saw this. Mm-hmm. A lot of people saw this. And people were coming and going, and they revived the individual, they gave him Narcan. But are we becoming, in many ways, so insensitive to this that we just come and go? Now, what you're doing makes great sense to me, but from what I saw there, people came and go as if it was just
Well, people are so voyeuristic, and it's about what can I get on social media. If you look at the young lady who passed out in the grocery store in Lawrence,
unbelievable,
and the child is trying to pick up her mom,
right.
And instead of supporting the child, helping the child, comforting the child by saying, I'm going to help take care of your mommy, they pulled their cell phone out, they put it on YouTube or social media or whatever it was. That child became less important to that individual than capturing something on tape. And I don't know, I can't wrap my head around that one, I'll be honest with you.
It's another example of the media, and you know how many times I saw that? And I was out of state at the time.
Yep.
Saw it on a news report, and I happen to know Chief Fitzpatrick of Lawrence.
He's a good man.
Good guy.
Good
and
man.
He's working very hard. He's working hard with us. There's a good relationship between the Chief and the New Hampshire troopers and police officers. But that particular situation, really.
And Bob, if I may, one last time, because this city oftentimes really beats up on Lawrence, Massachusetts.
Right.
We really do.
We do.
We beat up on him. But, it's interesting. I have conversations with Chief Fitzpatrick, and he goes, I understand our city is your problem, but your city and your state are our problem. And what he says is, New Hampshire has such an appetite, they're coming down to Lawrence. Lawrence doesn't have a large addiction pool like we do. So we set up this operation called Operation Trident. We actually got recognized by the DEA as the most successful operations in the state this past year. It was Manchester, State Police, DEA, Nashua. And what we did is we went down to Lawrence, Massachusetts with Massachusetts State Police, Lawrence PD. We sat on drug houses and we watched every single New Hampshire vehicle that went to a drug house, drove away. We then did a drug interdiction stop. If we made an arrest on the drugs, we then traced it back to another individual. In 7 operations, we arrested 220 New Hampshire residents in the city of Lawrence, Massachusetts, to buy drugs and bring them back to our state. So to be fair to them,
Yes.
we are their problem. If we need to shrink the addiction pool, and they need to eradicate the drug houses. If we do that, neither one of us have an issue.
Well,
So much to talk about
sure.
here. And you're doing so much, Chief, and I'm learning a lot from what you're telling me right here tonight. I thought we might turn quickly to another issue that's kind of in the news, and that's the encryption issue. We've had people protesting the policy on that, and I think you should explain it.
Yeah, I have no issues with the protest, frankly. I'm a liberty-loving guy. I believe in the First Amendment. I'm not one of these guys that's thin-skinned about that. I went to the protest yesterday just to say, hey, I appreciate your right to say it. I don't have to agree with everything. But, the encryption, when we decided to do this, I thought we had talked about it during the alderman meetings and stuff like that. I'm being told that we hadn't. It certainly was during the workup on the bid. So it was all in the bid and everything. I think the mistake that I made is not give a little bit of community input. Perhaps this thing came out a little bit awkward. Some of my friends in the media are really upset by it because, Chief, at least tell us, give us an opportunity. Now we can't listen to you. We can't. But the country is going that way. I know that there were some assertions made that only one town in the entire Northeast is doing it, and that's not the case. I put out an email to my FBI Academy class, and 16 people responded. 7 of them have full encryption. So it's actually, because the technology's here, it's starting to sweep the country. Why did I go there? Several reasons. First, the officer safety component. If you give what's going on across the country, these are sophisticated criminals. Law enforcement officers are targets. Homegrown terrorists are being developed through our Twitter and our social media right here in the state of New Hampshire. Information that I have. They have scanners, just like everybody else. They know where your officers are. I have direct information about a criminal group in Manchester that's now incarcerated who were listening to our scanners on their cell phones. That's a lot of things people don't realize, that you can listen to it right on your cell phone. And they were waiting, and because we've made arrests and we've debriefed these folks, and they were waiting to hear where a car on the west side would be. Okay, we're good, there aren't any cars over here. Or come on in for shift change kind of talk. So it was safe. It was unsafe for the officers. It gave the criminal element a heads up as to where we are, when we're going to be there, and whether or not we're even coming. Don't tell me that's not counterintuitive. And then, the one thing that I'm really hung up on that people just don't get with me is I really believe in protecting people's privacies. And when I put out, if you were to call me, Mr. Backus, and say, can you run this plate for me, Nick? And I did, and I gave you the information, I'd be committing a misdemeanor as a law enforcement officer. But I could put that plate number out over the radio, and it's going to come back. Person's name, date of birth, address. What else do you need if you're going to steal somebody's identity? And I think it's happened, and I think it is going to continue to happen. I had a mother send me an email about thank you for encrypting the radio, because I'll never forget when my son had a suicidal episode and went running off into the woods, my neighbors heard it on the scanner. And she didn't want her neighbors to know that. So there is a privacy component, and that's why I roll that same kind of issue in with body cameras. I am all for body cameras. I have no issues with body cameras. Well, I shouldn't say I don't have issues. I do. But I don't have any issues insofar as what it's going to reflect from the men and women of the Manchester Police Department. I am not concerned that these officers are putting these cameras on these officers to prevent them from misbehaving. It's just going to prove that they don't. The only issue I have, again, is that privacy aspect.
Give us an example of that. I know you mentioned one as we were coming in, where there was a real legitimate privacy concern.
And given our state is very fickle when it comes to personal liberties. I understand it's all about oversight of law enforcement. But again, you unencrypt your radios, everybody knows your information. We have HIPAA laws that protect people from knowing what your medical condition is.
Healthcare.
Right.
But all of a sudden, they're going to 405 Valley Street because Nick Willard's suffering from a cardiac arrest. If I walked into the Elliott 10 minutes later and says, "Hey, is Nick Willard in here?" They say, "We can't tell you that. It's
Right.
protected by
Because
HIPAA."
of privacy,
Does
right.
Nick Willard have a heart attack? Oh, we can't tell you that. But we blast it for everybody to hear. What's the value in that for the person who's upset about encryption? What's their value? The value so you're going to give up your privacy as a citizen just so you can oversight the police department. I don't get it. I have yet to have one complaint because somebody on the scanner did something that upset a citizen.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the oversight is. But my example would be this. I'm the police chief, and I have a domestic at my home. Or I'm running for political office, and I have a domestic at my home. And it comes across on the scanner, politician so-and-so, Willard, domestic at his house, you respond. The police officer then goes, right? He has his camera on. He's now in your home. He's videotaping your wife, your children, the inside of your home. Your opponent now says, I heard that there was a domestic there, heard it on the radio. I want a right to know on that video. Now, they say you can go in and you can change, you can alter the child's face, the victim's face, but it still has everything that's captured on video. Your personal situation is now the fodder for a political person or anybody that wants to do you harm.
I think you make an excellent point.
There's a voyeuristic component to encryption and body cameras that I'm concerned about. That people just want to know other people's business.
Yes.
Yeah.
Does that outweigh oversight? When you think about what Benjamin Franklin said about giving up a little bit of your liberty for security,
Deserve neither.
you deserve neither. So it's interesting, at the protests, I talked about privacy, and next thing you know, everybody was protesting, but they stepped back and said, "No, that's a good point."
Yeah, well, they should.
But I'm full body
We got a
cams.
caller here. Let's
All
see what we got. Hi, Joe. You're on the air with Lou and I and
Who's it,
Chief Willard.
Joe?
Joe, you there?
Yes.
Go right ahead.
Hey, Joe.
Welcome on.
Hey, Chief. Yeah, Chief, I just want to say it's my job to watch all the meetings, and I remember when you presented the encrypted scanners, and you were very clear that they were going to be encrypted. So a lot of people that are complaining now and protesting now simply weren't paying attention, and I just wanted to make that brief statement.
Joe, I appreciate it. Honestly, I don't remember if I did or didn't. I tried to remember. I tried to look at minutes. But, I still think perhaps I handled it a little bit awkwardly. Maybe I should have been a little bit more upfront just so people had an opportunity to vent beforehand as opposed to after.
Well, I mean, as a viewer and a citizen, there's no way I would have known that information other than by hearing it out of your mouth or the whoever, and Chief Burkish, I believe, was sitting next to you at the time.
That's correct.
But
Yep.
regardless, there's a lot of fervor about it now. But all that information was out there. Everyone was forewarned, and this is where we are. And I think you probably made the right move.
Yeah, I guess.
Have a great night.
All right, thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
Bye-bye.
Well, there's validation of the
I wouldn't-
fact that it was known. That's
But I
interesting.
wouldn't mind another caller coming in with a counterpoint.
Yeah, sure.
It's interesting because people said that they weren't notified, and I'm like, I could have swore. I even called Chief Burker. She's now in Hooksett.
Right.
And I said, Jamie, didn't we talk about this? He goes, of course we talk about it. And I says, I can't find minutes anywhere to say that we did, though.
Well, we got a witness now.
Right.
Says it happened.
Right, it happened.
Let's see what I was going to ask you next. Encryption, the cameras. We're hearing so much news today, through the police shootings, which are a tragedy every time one happens, and then shootings of police, which is a really horrible tragedy, and we've had too many of those. And you get the feeling in a lot of places there's a real wall between the police and some of the communities they serve in some of our major cities. Do we have any of that problem here in Manchester? Is there any place where you feel that police are not being treated as those who protect and serve, but as a problem?
I think the question is better asked to somebody who feels disenfranchised, to a minority, to a young black man in our country or a young Hispanic woman in our country. How do they feel about how the Manchester Police Department treats them? I've been frustrated. I've met with minority, like heads of minority groups, social groups in the city, and it's a lot of talk about what's going on nationally, but I don't really see any movement. So I've been doing something where I've been meeting with small groups of minority youth, 16 to 22. Most of them are black or Hispanic, men and women. And I'm basically saying, what do you feel? What do you see? How does the Manchester Police Department treat you? And I talked to this one young lady. She was 17. It was at the South Elm, Elmwood Gardens.
Yeah.
And I said, you ever had any negative interactions? I said, what are your feelings of police? She goes, it's very negative. And I says, well, tell me about some of your interactions you've had. She goes, well, I haven't, other than I see the guy at Memorial. And I go, so why do you have a negative opinion? She goes, I just fear every time I drive, I'm going to be stopped because I'm black. I said, oh, but how many times have you been stopped? She goes, well, I've never been stopped. I just have that fear because of what I see. So, you know, what they're seeing nationally does affect,
Absolutely.
you know, their prism locally.
Right.
So, yeah, we haven't had any problems. I will say I wouldn't tolerate problems at this police department. You know, when I saw a YouTube video of police misconduct, I played it in roll calls and said, if you do this, I would put you in prison. If you watched it, you're complicit, at least I'd fire you and maybe I could put a charge on you. If you instill in your officers what your expectations are, you hope that they will follow them, knowing that you're no nonsense. But really, how do we get to the disenfranchised to make them feel trusting? So I have 3 young men from some of these groups that I met, minorities, and they're going to come out and do a ride-along with the officers. They're going to give me back their impressions, and then we're going to have conversations and roll calls before the officers go out on the street and have that kind of Q&A to try to get a better understanding. Because it's really that lack of understanding that's getting in the way of any sort of progress.
Speaking of that, do you have officers who are fluent in Spanish?
We do.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yep.
Because we have many languages spoken in this city now.
We do.
I think one of the great public service announcements I've seen is the state police announcement where they speak in about 10 different languages.
Love it.
You know,
That's a good one.
I
It's a
think
great one.
It is a great one. And it's an example of the outreach, the kind of
Yeah.
things that you're talking about. And we need more multilingual people. I mean, it's just the way it's just the way it is. It's the way it is. And when I first came to town, we were a French-speaking community. Downtown on Thursday nights, they spoke French.
There were French radio programs, French newspapers.
French newspaper in
We
town.
had it all.
We did. And as I said, I've been living on the West Side most of my adult life here, and I lived in a French community. I could tell you that. And when I taught at the high school, at Bishop Bradley High School, half of my students were French speakers. So we've always been a multilingual society here in Manchester. It's just evolving. Other languages are coming into play, and Spanish is coming into play. There's a lot of Arabic being spoken in this community.
Yes.
So
We have some people fluent in Arabic too, as well. You know, one thing that I really tried to do is, or I'm trying to do, is diversify our ranks.
Yes.
And if you look at your elementary schools, and we have elementary schools in Manchester that the minority are the majority.
That's correct.
Fast forward 15 years,
Right.
you know, they're going to be a major demographic and start to represent your community. If you don't have a police department that reflects
Right.
your community, you run the risk of having a Ferguson, particularly without strong leadership, without somebody that puts the law down and says you won't tolerate shenanigans. But we're having such a difficult time hiring and attracting minority candidates that I'm almost dumbfounded as what I can do about it.
Why is it so hard?
You know, I don't know. I know that I've talked to a lot of the youths that I'm talking to, and I'm having these little round tables when it's just me and them. No parents, no community leader, no other police officers, chief, and these young kids. And 5 or 10 minutes into it, they start letting it rip.
Right.
And when I say, well, would you ever consider a career in law enforcement, they basically say they would be shunned by all their friends. And, you know, so there's a stigma about law enforcement in some of these communities. You're going to have to get through the stigma. You know, if you look at Willard Lett. Willard Lett is an African-American man. He's currently the head of the NAACP here
Yes,
in
I know him
Manchester.
well.
He's a great guy. He was a police commissioner for years. And we had breakfast once, and he said, Nick, you know how hard it was for me to be a police commissioner and try to explain that to my community? So he actually, and here he is, a strong, intelligent leader who's
Right.
respected in his community, in his minority community. And he got a lot of issues. He had a lot of issues from those within his community, basically saying you shouldn't be being on a police commission. You're supposed to be out there protesting these people.
Wow.
You know?
So speaking of your force, Chief, I understand you're not quite at a full strength, but you're pretty close. Is that right?
Yeah, we have we're shy 5 police officers right now, and that'll put us to the full 237.
And do you feel that you have the resources you need from the city to carry out the missions? Because you've certainly got a broad array of things you're trying to do.
I mean, I could use 30 more police officers if you really want me to. I mean, we did under Chief Mara, when I was the assistant chief, we did a study, a manpower study, and if everything were optimal, 263 police officers, I think we'd be optimal, and we would change the face of this city. Because putting more cops on the street helps. And I have been deploying more police officers every night in the city streets of Manchester than ever before in the history. I'm taking money from federal grants, and I'm using it to put officers, and I was explaining, a 2-man trouble car on the west side and a 2-man trouble car on the east side. And so there's 4 more officers, but those are just trouble cars that respond to critical incidents to free up the other officers. And then I'm going to be putting troopers and state police and MPD guys in cars together, and we're going to be saturating the city again because now I have some money to do it. But if I could do that with just my complement, I would be excited at the change I could bring to the city.
So other than getting your force up to its full complement, which it sounds like it's very close, and all the things you got going, have you got any thoughts about things you might do going forward?
I think my biggest challenge right now really is, navigating my budget because, with the new contracts from the officers who hadn't had a decent contract in a long time, this one was a fairly rich contract. It's the biggest one I've seen in a while, and that comes with a price tag on the taxpayer.
Yeah.
So how do we navigate that as a city? I want to be part of that solution.
There's a problem for the alderman.
It is, but I think it's also a responsibility of every single department head. Can I get grant money so I don't have to take things out of my budget? Can I cut back on my overtime? Can I encourage more officers, to do the HSA insurance so it costs the city less and saves money? I may not see it in my budget, but the city will see it in their savings, and then they could push it back into their budget. So right now, I think my biggest challenge, aside from crime and the typical things, is, how do we navigate these contracts that are coming in all across the city that's going to affect every single one of us? Right now, that's my biggest challenge. How do we overcome this?
Does your budget include a substantial amount of federal funding?
It's not in our budget. We have federal funding, like the ACERT team that I talked about. Right. We created this thing called the Institute of Justice, or I can't remember the name. It's a moniker we put on it, but it's predicated on the ACERT, where they're going to be doing it in real time, every day, working out of the same office. So police officer, social worker, and an advocate. All those are going to be paid for by the federal government. So I'm going to hire an additional police officer. I'll go over my complement by 1, and that officer is going to, theoretically, that officer is going to be working straight with this, taking care of children who are experiencing trauma, and that's a $795,000 grant that we got.
Wow.
So that won't come out of the city money, and we're providing a service for 3 years that we had never provided before.
Okay.
I think the proof in any contract is in the performance of the people who received it. If people's perception is that our police force is doing a good job, there's no problem, because there's worth there, there's value, and that value is perceived value, and it seems to be, from what you have said this evening, our perceived value is that we're doing a good job. Any job could be done better. We all strive for perfection. We don't get there, but we're doing a good job. The people of Manchester are safe. They're being well protected. They're being well served, and they have every right to that. and in turn, those who are doing this work deserve every right to be compensated fairly for the work that they're doing.
Well, thank you. I mean, and I understand people, like we had a woman last night speak in front of the Board of Mayor and Aldermen about the police contract and how she, although she respects law enforcement and she respects the Manchester Police Department, she just simply can't afford a tax hike in her tax bill. And I understand that. So I agree. I think the officers deserved this
absolutely.
contract. I would say they deserved more. I know what they're going through. I see it every single day. We are taking pains now. It's called situational awareness, where we're constantly reminding each other, don't sit in one place at the same time.
Right, sure.
Two officers go to a call and a third officer slides by. They're looking up at windows and rooftops, to see if anybody's out there. I tell officers that when you're going to gas up your cruisers, don't do it together. Make sure there's only one person at a time, because they want to get officers in a large area. If you look at the Orlando shooting, they shot a police officer at the gas pumps where they know the police officers gas their pumps. And then he laid in wait, knowing that if you shoot a police officer, who's coming?
Another
More police officers.
Sure.
So he just started picking them off as they started to come. And these are our realities now.
Yes.
It's not
Yeah.
conceptual. These are our realities.
Right, that's
Chief,
real life.
wonderful of you to join us. This has been fascinating discussion.
I talk a lot.
I learned a lot. Well, you got a lot to say. It's
Right,
one thing
a
to
lot
talk
to
and
say.
not say anything, but you got a lot to say,
Right.
and it's terrific. I hope you're loving your job, because I think it's such an important job, and I hope you're loving it.
I do, and I'm learning every day. I when I make a mistake, I try not to repeat it, and I made a few.
Okay.
If you notice, my Twitter page is much less controversial and more,
Guys, we have
more
to close.
fun-loving.
Okay, we
Okay.
all make mistakes, but
Thank you very much.
that's why the eraser
Be back
business
next
is a
week
big
with another
thing.
edition without Lou, but with Mike Farley.
Thank you.